We'll go ahead and start recording, and it'll just be my blank face for a while. Hopefully when I do a screen share, it will work. Actually, let me double check that. I may have to do something different. Okay, can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay, stop share real quick. Okay, all right, so this is sad. I'm sorry that you can't see my face. I promise I'm smiling. Okay, so we are in for, I think this is our, not quite our second to last Zoom, but we are getting close to the very end of the our time together. Today marks the first week of our last kind of segment of units, our last theme. We have started out this semester for the first couple of weeks talking about leadership of self. Then we moved into leadership of others and working in teams. And now we are going to end the semester on leadership of organizations and getting into some financial management pieces. So what I wanted to do today in our hour of course time is I wanted to just do a check-in with all of you. Then I wanted to kind of go back to our PowerPoint from units 5 through 7 that I didn't have a chance to meet with you all via Zoom during that time. And I wanted to just touch on a couple of key points from that, and then do just a couple from the PowerPoint from this week, and then we will go into office hours, and then we will be done. So before I kind of get started with everything, are there any questions, comments, concerns, or any kind of logistical issues, any questions about Canvas or anything like that? Any questions from anybody? Okay. I have been going through all of your outlines, your SWOT outlines, and I've got several group meetings scheduled. I'm still kind of waiting to hear back on a couple of different times, so hopefully those will get scheduled in the next little bit. I'm very excited. It looks like all of the groups have a good agency that you're working with, and you're actively getting information. That's really, really good. Again, my group meetings that are required with each of your groups, so every group member needs to be present. Because of scheduling and time zones and stuff, I am willing to meet in kind of later in the evenings or on the weekends if I need to. There are some evenings that I just am not available, but I am trying to be flexible with you all on that. And the rationale for those is just to make sure that we're on the same page, to answer any questions that you have, to just really kind of help make sure that you all are on the right track, because I don't get to meet with you all every week. So that's looks like progress on that. I am still working through your leadership self-assessment papers. I know you all are probably wondering what in the world happened to those, but I am going to get to those as soon as I can, hopefully later this week or early next week. I really want to get those back to you as soon as possible. So let's see, I think that's all the logistics. Oh, scheduling the SWOT presentations. You will note that we have a Zoom scheduled for April 16th and April 23rd. Most everybody wants to present on the 23rd. I don't think I've had anybody who wants to present on the 16th. We have 5 groups. That will be really long if we all present, but I think that it is possible if we can keep the presentations to that 15 to 20 minutes. That the downside of that for me as an instructor is it means that if we all present on the same day, that we don't really have time to have any kind of Q&A, or for students to ask questions or ask any kind of follow-up. And so for me to kind of give you all, your group, kind of real-time feedback or just anything like that. So it just kind of means we have to go group, start, group ends, the next one starts, and it just winds up being pretty tightly compacted. So, but it does mean that we could essentially not have class on the 16th, but we would have to extend the, I think, our time together on the 23rd. I don't think we could get through 5 groups in an hour and a half. So I wanted to check in while I had everybody here. What do you think? Would you all be okay extending the time? Like maybe to 8 o'clock? Oh, is there another class? Is that the issue? Oh, boo. Okay. We could do it and not go too far past 7 o'clock. If everybody was really timely, everybody was ready to go, and if you really kept your presentations closer to 15 minutes than 20 minutes. So does that, and we'll just kind of tentatively schedule 5:30 to 7:30 on the 23rd. Does that sound better to y'all? I'm seeing some head shaking. Does that work?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you. Well, I will go ahead and make a note to cancel the 16th, and then we will do 5:30 to 7:30. And if we go 5:30 to 7:30, it means we've got, I can probably just do like 2 minutes of kind of questions at the end if you go to 20 minutes. But hopefully, if we can kind of think like 15 minutes for presentation and then like 5 minutes for Q&A, so then everybody has 20 minutes and we, are pretty good with shifting around, that should work just fine. Okay, great. Okay, that feels good. Thank you for letting me know there's conflicts. I promise you all, we try really hard every single semester to not have conflicts. I mean, we get our dates in so early and it still happens somehow. But I think it's just because there's so many different sections and it just happens. But I promise you that we try. We are not cavalier about that. I know it's probably frustrating for you all, and I'm sorry about having the mix-ups. But here now, you no longer have a conflict on the 16th. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I am going to share the screen here. Okay. I wanted to, there's a couple of things from this slide presentation that I wanted to make sure that I had a chance to go over live with you and see if you have any questions or comments, and just because I know all of this just doesn't necessarily translate when you're just reading the PowerPoint. So this whole, well, just go back a second. This very long slide deck was really a labor of love from my time at the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. And I worked with some national consultants on collaboration, just specifically collaboration, and developed for our community providers what we call the Collaboration Guild, because the type of work that we were engaged in for children's mental health was fraught with conflict and volatility and uncertainty and an extraordinary amount of competition. You would not necessarily think that children's mental health that would be that challenging an environment, but it truly, truly was. And I worked on a number of what we call system of care grants and initiatives that were really around bringing people together from, Okay. Just wanted to, our whole goal with System of Care was to bring all of the different systems together on behalf of, one child and one family. And that was really hard because when you think about it, the systems that are involved in children's mental health are every single system. So every system like child welfare and health and mental health and primary care and Medicaid and education, early education, recreation. I mean, every place that a kid goes is represents a different system. Families, communities, and those systems did not traditionally work together, and they were very, very siloed. And so it was a real uphill battle for people to come together and try to find ways to work together. And so I worked with these national consultants from Change Matrix, and they're all listed on the very last slide of this slide deck. And we had some funding to do some trainings and kind of work together and develop this long-term kind of coaching model for collaboration across, I think it was a whole year that we did that, and worked with kind of smaller groups and had coaches meet with kind of these sort of local teams that got together. And it was I learned so much. And we trained probably, I don't know, between 100 and 200 people in the state on all of this that I'm now sharing with you. And it reminded me that, I brought it into my life here at University of Tennessee because it was something that was so, I found to be so needed and so practical, but also at the same time very, abstract. Like, we think that, if you sit down at a table and you sit across from someone that you're just, and you have a project that you're working on, that you're both professionals, and you're going to decide what needs to be done, and you're going to make a plan, and you're going to execute that plan, and then you're going to achieve your goals, and then you're going to move on to the next thing. And oftentimes it does work like that, but then oftentimes, especially when there's competition and bad blood and or uncertain goals or unrealistic goals or no goals at all, professional world and social services can get very, very complicated. And so all of the work around collaboration is really an opportunity for us as social workers to figure out, how do we want to show up in the work that we do? And if we are leaders, what type of leaders do we want to be in that environment? Whether we're working on an interdisciplinary team with, doctors and nurses, or teachers, or special ed teachers, or whatever that may look like. It's so important that we have a strong foundation with, who we want to be in that work, and that we have real tangible skills to move that work forward. So a couple of things that I wanted to highlight with you tonight from this are really in that latter part of, like, real practical tools that you all can take away in whatever system that you're going to work with, that are really geared towards making sure that when you are working in a group setting, that you are setting up expectations and structures and supports that help move that work forward in a really strong way. So this, as you all have seen from reviewing these slides, there's a lot of notes in the slides that you can review, but we'll kind of just talk through them right now. But so it was broken down into principles, and then just different skills. So this particular one I wanted to highlight is principle 4, and that is collaboration is an intentional process and is worth protecting. And so what does that mean? That essentially means that when we sit down to work in concert with another individual or another team, or don't forget that collaboration exists within a client setting, a therapeutic setting, and when you're working with families, you're still working together. So there's an element of kind of needing that compromise and that give and take as you're working together. So it means that there is a way to sit down and do that work in an intentional way. It doesn't have to be left to personality. It doesn't have to be let to be left to be driven by fear or lizard brain or ego or anything like that. You really can, you are at choice with how you sit down and work with people. And also that it's an important process and is worth protecting. So when we are working together, especially on behalf of the vulnerable clients and communities and populations that social workers serve, that we have an opportunity to really do some good work, and that usually when we work together, we're going to get a better outcome than if we work individually. So it's something that it's a process that we really want to make sure that we are both intentional about and that we protect. So some of the kind of concrete ways that we can do that are kind of first and foremost attending to balance. So if you think about like a teeter-totter, like a seesaw, you've got some, pressure on one side and pressure on the other side, and you're trying to kind of keep the weight the same so that it runs smoothly and you can kind of, achieve that balance. And when you're working with other people, when you're working in a collaborative setting, which is, your SWOT groups, for example, I mean, that's what you all are doing is you're collaborating to, achieve a common goal. And in that work, you are experientially practicing achieving this balance between task, relationship, and maintenance, which essentially means how are you balancing what you're doing, which is the task, which is the work. So, completing the assignment, you're balancing that up against the relationship, which is how do you interact behaviorally and emotionally and mentally together as, human beings. What does that relationship look like? And also, what is your relationship to each other, and what is your relationship to the work? And then you're also lastly balancing it with maintaining the balance. So you're constantly in this space and this where you're kind of having this energy of like, oh, we're getting behind on our assignment. We haven't heard from our contact at the agency. Okay, let's hurry up and kind of focus on the task. And then you may be trying to maintain your balance with your relationship and making, checking in with people. Group member number one, I haven't heard, you're the leader, and you've sent a couple emails out and you haven't heard from somebody in a little while, you want to check in with that person to make sure that they're doing okay, that there's not something that's happened, and to see if they need anything that you can help them with so that they can kind of get back to the work, get back to the task. So we are constantly in this place where we are trying to kind of balance these three elements. So some of the ways that we balance that is kind of another lens is kind of thinking about this as like three sides of a triangle. And so if you're trying to achieve this balance, one way to look at that is by thinking about working in groups that there are kind of three core elements. There is a substantive element, which is kind of similar to the task. So this is like, what is the work that you're actually doing? There is a relational element, which is exactly what I just said about the relationships. And lastly, there's a procedural element, which, it is, maintenance to an extent, but it's also kind of taking it further, that it's like, what are the kind of the processes and behaviors that are both supporting the substance of your work and that are also supporting the relational aspects of your work. You have probably heard me say many times in class that I'm a quote unquote process person. I very much am a process person, which essentially all I mean by that is that if there are three sides to this triangle and I'm working with you, I'm over here attending to the procedural aspects of our work. This is what I care about more than anything. And there are pros and cons to that. And there probably are very few people that you're going to meet that are like equally balanced between all of these three needs. Most of social workers, especially if you look at your strengths finder results, most of us are in this relationship building place, and we are very, very relational people. That's why we're attracted to this work. We want to be therapists. We want to be counselors. We want to work with others. and we want to help people, those folks are our relational folks. These are the people who are always going to want to know, how is your grandmother? How is your dog? How is your sister? How is your spouse? What's going on at home? Like, what did you do this weekend? Did you go to this concert? They're the people who are kind of, talking in between the work and really doing a lot to build those relationships, which are really, really, really important. And then there are people who are very much focused on the substantive work. And I think a lot of you, these are a lot of our kind of people who probably have strengths in executing, and I kind of call these people our taskmasters. These folks want to know who, where's our to-do list? How many of the boxes have we checked off? Where are we going? Where have we been? What are our expectations? What are our rules? How are we going to get there? So this is, and as you can see, if you kind of take a step back, all three of these things are very, very important. The process piece is, how do we, the procedural piece are, what are the rules and expectations that we're following so we can get the work done? And, how are we going to, what are the rules and expectations around how we're going to, act with each other? Like, what does respect mean for us? What times are our meetings? What are the logistics? Are there bylaws for this group? How are we going to make a decision? Do we vote? Is this a democracy? Are we like a board, or do we just try to form some kind of informal consensus? That's just as important for figuring out the relational pieces as it is the substantive pieces. So there, you can see that if you can balance these things and maintain that balance between these three things, you are probably going to, there's probably not a goal that you can't reach because, people are going to be happy because you've got strong relationships. You're going to have strong outcomes. So your funders are going to be happy. Your bosses are going to be happy. Your clients are going to be happy because you're really doing the work that needs to be done. And then you also know how and why you got where you needed to get. You had an evaluation plan. You were very clear about your expectations. People understood the rules. They knew when they were going to meet, all these different things. So you can kind of see how having a strong balance with this work can really make collaboration effective. And you can also see how if things on your triangle are kind of lopsided, or you're focusing too much on the work and not enough relationally, or you're focusing, believe it or not, some people overly focus on process and procedural issues and never even get around to the work because they've spent 3 months just trying to figure out how they're going to make a decision that they haven't even started to work yet. And then some people are just so focused on the relationship piece that in an hour meeting, you spent 45 minutes chatting and then you only have 15 minutes to actually focus on the work. So when you get out of balance, it's pretty easy to kind of see that you're out of balance. So I'm going to stop right there and see if there are any questions about this piece. And if anybody can kind of identify whether, which kind of side of the triangle that you feel you're on, or if you've kind of seen concepts like this in action before. No comments. There's not a single comment. If anybody's talking, you're on mute.
Professor Steckel, this is Donna. Just one comment. Our team, I feel, has jumped in very well on the relational standpoint, given the limitation that we're all. Can you hear me?
Okay. Well, I will keep going. So one thing about this is, with all of this, talk about, balancing and maintenance, how do you actually do this? So here are some tips.
I heard you.
For things to think about.
Yeah, I heard you as well. Professor Steckel?
Oh, okay.
That's so
Professor Steckel, can you
hear
us?
Oh, Donna, yeah, if you were talking, I couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me?
But some people did. Gosh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I definitely didn't hear you, Donna. Wow, I can't hear anyone. I'm going to stop sharing for a second, see if that helps.
Can you hear us?
Who was talking?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us now?
Wow. Yeah, I can't. It's so sad. Oops. Oh, okay. Okay. Yikes. Okay. I am going to keep going. I am terribly sorry that you all cannot hear me. Okay. I wanted to go over this slide. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting someone. Just kind of keeping the clock going. So one of the conversations around this is like, how do we actually, balance out this work? So a couple of tips for keeping things balanced is, and this is really in service again of like moving this work forward, making sure that everybody's on the same page. And so you really can simply ask the question. You can poll your team on their satisfaction with each of these elements on a regular basis, and especially anytime that you experience changes in team dynamics or direction, any conflict between group members at all. So often conflict arises and occurs because somebody's expectations are not being met. And so when you kind of unpack those expectations, you're probably going to find that they were never clear to begin with. And so the expectations were just, you just kind of made them up. The person just assumed them, or they just were communicated, but they weren't clear. Or oftentimes it's a bit of a personality or a strengths issue, in that somebody was leaning into their relational strengths and they were working with somebody who was really focused on kind of the substantive aspects of the work. And so you had one person who just wanted to sit down and get to know people before they felt really safe kind of talking or engaging in any meaningful way. And then you had another person who was just like, we are behind, we got to get this done. And so there was this kind of conflict that arose for that reason, or some, kind of variation of that. Oftentimes, you might experience in a group setting apathy from one or more group members. If you find somebody who used to be engaged and then all of a sudden they're just, or not, maybe not all of a sudden, but gradually they're sort of falling off, they're not as attending meetings as regularly, they just don't seem as interested, their work contribution has slacked off, that is a great time to check into that person and say, what are your expectations? Are they being met? Do you feel like we're getting the work done? Are you confused or unclear about, the expectations and how we're kind of focusing on stuff? Or, hey, let's go to lunch and let's kind of just check in and talk about how things are going. Group dysfunction. The dysfunction is probably caused because there's not a strong balance between these three things. So kind of checking in to see like, gosh, we've met so many times and we're still focused on what it is we're doing, and we haven't even gotten into the work, and the work is really important. So, half the group is really irritated and frustrated, so they don't really want to participate anymore. And, kind of same thing for lack of progress towards group goals. Just these are great ways to identify, specific reasons for why is our group not working together. Or, just to check in to see like, gosh, we're doing a really good job. Like maybe let's just take a little time out and figure out why so that other groups can replicate this and we can explain, to other folks how we are doing this. And so there's lots of different pieces that can be really important. This is also really, really, really important at the very beginning when you are establishing a group. So like you have a new group this semester, or next semester you'll be in another group project, or you're in some kind of interdisciplinary team with your internship or with work. Asking these questions on the front end, especially if you're your kind of group leader or group facilitator is not addressing these issues, that is a perfect time to step up and engage and ask questions around, well, what are the expectations? Or, what do you expect of me? Or can you, take me out to lunch and give me a summary of kind of what this group was able to accomplish over the last year? One of the things that I have been most chagrined by in my many years of professional experience, and working kind of in the social work field is the lack of, onboarding is the term that I'm thinking of, but that's not necessarily, that's more about kind of HR stuff or kind of bringing people into your workplace. But I have seen kind of group membership in different meetings and committees and things like that. I've seen people turn over because usually you've got representation from some group or some agency on that, but then that person changes. Well, then they've taken, when that person turns over, they've taken all the institutional knowledge with them from their agency. So you have to kind of train up a new person to be able to meaningfully engage in the work. And so often the facilitator or leader of that group does not take any time at all to meet with that new person and bring them on and kind of show them the ropes and like let them know what is expected of them. And if any of you ever are in a group setting and you find yourself as either the facilitator that's not bringing somebody, not kind of bringing them on in a good way, or you find yourself being that person who's not being brought in a good way, do something about it, because there's no point in sitting on a group for 6 months and then, gosh, what have I been doing this whole time? I know my boss tells me I have to go to this meeting, but I don't even know what this meeting is about. And it happens with extremely intelligent, motivated, high level people. It still happens to them. So this is something that happens at all levels. And this kind of goes back to that intentionality piece. Like, group work doesn't have to look like that. It doesn't have to be such a mess. It can be really positive and intentional. And Courtney, if you were trying to say something in the chat, it did not come across. So just some things to remember as you're working in groups. And cat, that's hilarious. Okay, so I'm gonna stop right there, and unfortunately I'm gonna try to I'm gonna ask you guys if you have a specific question for me or a comment to please put it in the chat so that I can participate, because I really feel like y'all probably have some really good comments, but I can't hear them. So I'll just stop right there and see if anybody wants to type out any comments or questions. I just put in some headphones. Can somebody try to say something? I want to see if I can hear you through here.
Hello?
Oh my gosh, I can hear you. I should have done this. Okay, I can hear y'all. All right, did y'all have any thoughts about that? Or any questions, comments that I may have missed before?
Well, this is Donna. Just a quick comment on that relational side that I was mentioning earlier, that I feel like our team has gelled really quickly and really well, and I suspect the other teams are having the same challenge, but we're working with it. Is that relational side, I believe, is impacted by our Zoom limitation, and I'm not asking for a change or anything on that, but the fact that we know we only have 40 minutes to do a meeting, the relational side tends to get that's the part that gets sacrificed for that, because we're like, no chit chat, jump in, we got to get going. So we're really focused on the procedural and substantive.
Yeah.
But we could probably benefit from a little more relational. But that's probably a good life lesson too, right? Is you don't get everything you want, and we just make it work.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Donna. And speaking, can y'all hear me through this?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So speaking of making it work, is it not possible for so Donna, so you've kind of got, the first 40 minutes of the meeting, and then at 41 to 65, cannot somebody else?
We do. That's how we do it.
Switch over?
Yeah, but that's a procedural challenge. You know how that goes. Every time it's a new variable that's introduced, and there's always somebody that has a volume issue. It's just like we've encountered here. But totally, we're making it work, and it's all good life lessons. Totally.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I know. I had somebody tell me that they a mentor previously. They refused. They never made a meeting for an hour. They only ever made meetings in 45-minute blocks, because he said, well, you just kind of talk for those other times, and it's not really, there's always some kind of transition issue. So you make it for 45 minutes, and then, you can kind of actually have time to follow up in that 15 minutes before you go to your next one.
I had a comment for Donna. This is Sharice, and as far as the relational side goes, me and my group have done fairly well with exchanging phone numbers. We have a group text message that we do, and we send random comments to each other almost every week. We were talking before class started today, so it kind of helps with the getting to know everybody and the personalities and how they speak and what they like and dislike. Just a nice group text message going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. We did that as well. And texting is it's effective, especially for a quick message, or did you get this, or where can I find this? So yeah, thanks, Sharice. That's really good.
Yes, very true. Thank you all. Okay, so there is one other piece here around important piece I want to talk about with kind of doing the collaboration. So back when you all were forming your SWOT teams, I sent you a list of questions for you all to think about, and a lot of them, came from this conversation. This whole idea that, so if we want to be intentional about, how we're being in collaboration, or what we're doing, how do we get there? And these 7 structured conversations for building and maintaining effective collaboration is a great place to start. So kind of leaning into, what are these kind of concrete skills that you all can develop. And a lot of them boil down to literally just a conversation. So if something is unclear, you ask a question, an open-ended question, and you try to get clarification. You open up the dialogue. And so you can do that around, anything that's going on in your group process. So, how can we be more relational with these, technological limitations that we have? What can we do? What's going on? Does this work better if I use a different platform? Whatever that may be. It's also on really foundational things like understanding, getting this clarity of purpose, understanding, having clear roles and responsibilities that are actually communicated, having shared expectations, having shared values. This is critical. Everybody who's taking policy now, that values are, the clear motivators for policy, whether you see them or not, they are there. And so that's just as true for any kind of work that you may be engaging in, social work, understanding what those shared values are. And often that's a good place where conflict arises is you don't actually, you think you have shared values, but you don't. Or you don't agree on how you should kind of get there or put them into action. Having shared language, staying away from jargon, especially when kind of new people come on board. If you sit through a meeting and all you do is talk an acronym, that new person may have no idea what you're talking about, and it may feel very alienating. It especially can feel alienating when you're trying to work in a therapeutic setting with a client. If you use language that they don't understand, whether it's because of reading level or because of like language proficiency, like that can be a huge limitation, and could be really insulting when that's not what you want to do. It can put up barriers where what you want to do is tear them down. So the language piece is really important. And internal structures is a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about around processes and procedural issues, logistics, meeting expectations, things like that. And external connections is more like, what is the work that we're doing, and who does it matter to? So are we reporting to a board? Are there community stakeholders or clients that are kind of external to the group, but that it's really important that we have a kind of a direct link and a line of communication to them. So there's ways to have these different conversations, and that's really what the next group of slides kind of goes over. But I wanted to jump to one that is here. Oh, it's actually in the next section under skills. Kind of getting into the conversations. I wish we had time to go through all of this, but I know we just don't. Okay. So the ladder of inference. So this is one of my, was one of the most powerful concepts that I think I took away from all of this work around collaboration. And that is essentially how, when we are working with other humans, and what I'm about to describe, we have all done. So don't think that you have not done this, because everybody has done this. The important thing is not to judge. The important thing is to acknowledge and to just simply be aware, so that you can make a conscious choice to handle a situation differently. So facts and interpretation of facts. So the theory around this is that essentially we infer, kind of going up and down a ladder, we infer things about facts. So, or we kind of make up facts. So where we start on that ladder is simply observable data and experience. So an example here is, you walk into a meeting, and it's a meeting that you have on a regular basis. Let's say it's maybe your weekly staff meeting. It's Monday morning. It's always Monday. You kind of walk in, and there's somebody that you don't really know. We'll call her Jenny. So Jenny, you don't really know her very well, but you've worked with her for several months, and you kind of know her, and you never kind of know what you're going to get from her. So you walk in, and you see her, and she just, you kind of try to acknowledge her, but she just sort of like looks down and doesn't acknowledge you. So that's an experience, and there's observable data. So you've essentially observed body language. You've observed a coworker, when you walked into the room, and you observed them essentially not acknowledge you and kind of look down. So that's just kind of just somewhat common example. So, oops. Okay. So what happens after that? So we select the data. So the data that we select, it could be anything, because your brain only picks up certain things. We don't see everything that there is to see. So let's say, for example, Jenny, when you walked in, Jenny was in the middle of a text, and she was on her phone, and let's say she was responding to somebody, but so she put her head down to look at her phone, but you didn't, just kind of the way she was positioned, you didn't necessarily see that she had her phone, that she was actually focused on something else, and you walked in, and she kind of looked up, saw you, but then was needing to be focused on her phone, but you didn't necessarily see that. So what you did is you kind of selected the data that you observed. So, you kind of didn't see the phone part, but you saw her put her head down. Okay. The next thing is that selected data, we add meaning to that. So you saw Jenny put her head down when you thought she should have been smiling at you and like acknowledging that you had just walked into the room and getting ready for the meeting. But instead you saw her look down and essentially ignore you. And so you said, you know what? I knew Jenny didn't like me. I knew she was just not a nice person. Somebody said something to me the other day about this, and this just confirms that. You add meaning to that selected data. The next thing is that because we've added meaning now to this, only one part of the situation to that specific data, we then adopt beliefs and feelings about the situation or the person. So that's that example of, I saw her put her head down, I knew she didn't like me, and then you kind of take it a step further and you just kind of make generalizations, or you kind of say, okay, Jenny is just, I heard she was rude to this other person, she's just not a nice person, she's not friendly, blah, any other thing you want to add to that situation that we've pretty much all been in. And here is the key part with this, is that the next time, because of this ladder of inference and just kind of how we move through it and interpret facts, you've observed something, you've selected data, you have added meaning to that, and then you have adopted beliefs and feelings about a situation or person that you then take action on. So you assume those beliefs and actions to be true, and then you change your behavior. It's no longer about the other person or the situation, it's about you. And you take action based on those beliefs and feelings that you assume to be true. At no point have you had a conversation with Jenny. At no point have you asked her what was going on, that, she couldn't say something. At no point did you realize that she had just gotten some terrible news about the health of her mother, and she was really, really concerned and feeling very inward in that moment. And so she just simply could not acknowledge you when you walked in. You didn't know those things. You didn't ask about those things. You made other beliefs and assumptions, and then you took action. And so the next time you walked into the room, or the next time you saw Jenny walking down the hall, you ignored her. You said, well, she's going to, not acknowledge me. I'm not really going to go out of my way to acknowledge her. I've made this assumption that she's not a very friendly person, so I'm just not really going to make a whole lot of effort to be friendly to her. And then what happens after that? It starts all over again. Our beliefs influence the data we select when we find ourselves in similar circumstances. And we tend, here's the kicker, we tend to select data that supports our beliefs. So the next time you see Jenny and she looks down, you may say, there's Jenny doing that thing that she does all the time. Or you may only see her look down, and you may miss the time that she's, actually acknowledging you, or actually, doing something that goes counter to what you believe about her. And so it's this, we kind of go up the ladder and then down the ladder, up the ladder, down the ladder. And we just kind of go in this reflexive loop that we are not really even conscious that we're doing. And I find this absolutely fascinating, because I most definitely have done this. We definitely do this about people that we know really well. We also do this with people that we don't know at all. And instead of kind of stopping and being intentional and asking questions, or trying to really get to know somebody, we make assumptions, we select data, we add meaning to that. And we don't ever question ourselves, because we believe, we've settled on our opinion and we believe it to be right. And then we find, then we just see all these other examples from that person that just prove our point. See, I told you she wasn't friendly, or see, I told you he was such a great guy, or see, I hope, whatever that may be. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are, now that I can hear you, if there's any questions or thoughts or comments about this piece.
I thought that was really interesting. I've definitely, like you said, I've definitely had this experience before multiple times, but now that I'm older, I usually take a different approach, and I think than when I was younger. And if I feel like somebody might be like avoiding me or something like that, or being rude, I will intentionally be extra nice to them, and just make a point to go out of my way to have conversation with them to make sure.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And something that sounds like it's, changed over time and has, really based on your experience. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's good. That's good. Any other comments? Anybody been through this before they can share an example of?
I don't know that I have a specific example, but I know I tend to struggle a little bit with social anxiety. So it's really easy for me to interpret other people's behavior as something that's against me. So I really have to be vigilant and think like, well, if something happens, I have to remember, well, it might not have anything to do with me, and then not react accordingly.
Charity, that is an excellent example, and I think that's one that we can probably all relate to on some level, is that especially with things like public speaking or being in a meeting or something like that, we can oftentimes assume that people we all sort of think the world revolves around us, right? We're all just a little bit narcissistic to a certain degree, if we're just being totally honest. We tend to think that people are talking about us when really they're not. We tend to think that people are, if we wore mismatched socks, or if we, did something weird, that of course somebody saw it, and of course they're judging us, and it's just kind of the human condition. But really, when we stop and think, we know that that's not true. And we know that people have better things to do than worry about us all the time. But we constantly, it's human nature to be worried about it. And I love this this kind of frame, because it helps remind me that it doesn't, I don't have to stay on this ladder. I don't have to keep going through this loop. And especially, I'm somebody who I'm going to, if something didn't go well, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to replay it in my head over and over and over again. And I'm going to start probably going up and down this ladder, but it's not going to get me anywhere good. And this reminds me that I need to kind of take a time out and ask clarifying questions. And I need to make sure that I haven't just, cherry picked the data that's going to support my point, that I'm actually, taking a listening stance and staying curious and staying open about that person or that situation, to see what unfolds, to see what new information there is that might completely change whatever meaning or whatever beliefs or feelings about a situation that need to be changed. So any other thoughts or examples about this?
I also have a thought on that. I feel like I do this a lot when it comes to discrimination, and it may be a paranoia. That
Okay.
I'm from New York originally, and I guess I'm used to a lot of diversity, and so now I live in Nashville, which is great. But there are times where I do a lot more second guessing, because this is my first experience in the last year and a half living in the South, and so I assume certain things, and so I do a lot of the second guessing of being like, is someone using that tone with me because of race? And so I'm very preoccupied a lot more than I ever was before when it comes to the situation of like second guessing and being like, oh no, we're just going to ignore that and we're just going to act normal. And, so I don't know if anyone else has that feeling, but I feel like there's an intersection with this and like maybe like racism or discrimination, where you're so paranoid that you're not being treated a certain way. And then you start acting in order, like almost like protectively. You're like, well, I know what that person is doing. I know what's going on, and then you try to like counteract that with maybe a different, changing your attitude. And so it just gets stressful.
Exhausting.
So I don't know,
It sounds exhausting.
Mentally exhausting, because you want to be treated and you don't want to treat people negatively, but it's almost like a guard you put up, because you just don't want to be fooled or have people take advantage of you. And so it's exhausting, honestly.
Thank you for that, Kendria. I feel you. That does sound really exhausting, and it sounds like something that we all need to take note of, and see where we are with that, and see if, we've ever participated in anything like that. Seeing if we've ever been, kind of questioning our own behavior. And I think, so much, what is it, like 80% of communication is nonverbal. So much of this, like that whole example that I talked about, Jenny, it was totally nonverbal. We had this whole story, this whole narrative in our head, and nobody said a word. And so sometimes language is the medicine. Sometimes actually having a conversation, which is why, again, going back to there's 7 conversations to have even about collaboration. There's what are we actually, where can we have direct communication? And, it sounds like, Kendria, in some of those examples, like there may not be an opportunity for conversation, but I wonder if that might simply be the, one of, I'm sure not the only, but one of the remedies, or one of the possibilities to kind of fighting some of that exhaustion. Because I certainly can't sit here and tell you that that's what your experience is not true. I've lived in the South my whole life. So, I know what people are like. I just don't know what they're like from your perspective. So, or from anybody else's perspective. So, but I do know that we do misinterpret things. Like, it's just simply human nature. It's fact. We misinterpret things all the time, and we always, always, always see things through our lens. And the only counterbalance to that, the only possible way out of that, is to be aware, to be intentional, and to actually take behavioral steps, actually take steps to try to clarify those assumptions, which are not, unfortunately, not appropriate in every single setting. But where it is appropriate, we do just kind of need to take a step back and say, is this really what happened? I really felt like, this is how I was treated, or this is what you were thinking, when I said this. And I cannot tell you how often I have done that, and how often I have been wrong about what I was thinking. Because and one of the perfect examples is just simply, I speak to a lot of groups. I have to give as an instructor, as a teacher, a professor, I give lots of presentations. And so I read people, I read students' body language, I read faculty body language, I read community partner, everybody, how they're reacting. And sometimes people will do things while I'm talking that are so offensive and so disrespectful. And I have to kind of take a step back and say, well, first of all, I have to keep talking. But afterwards, sometimes I have to have one-on-one conversations with people and say, hey, when I said this particular thing, I saw your face do X, Y, and Z. Can you help me understand what that was about? And usually I'm wrong. Like, usually they were thinking something different, or they didn't quite understand what I said, or, there was something that got lost in translation. And I'm typically always grateful that I took the time to clarify that for both myself and my own sanity and the other person.
I have an example from kind of the opposite end of the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bit introverted, and I work for a company that's fairly small, less than 15 people. And they have social gatherings where they all go out to eat. They have Christmas parties at each other's houses, and I never go. I am one of 3 African-American people that works for the company, and I was told once that the majority of the people there thought that I was racist, or I might not like white people, or I didn't like the company crew as a whole, because I never went to any of the social gatherings. So I kind of had to go around and explain to people one by one, hey, I really do like you guys. I'm just not a social gathering type of girl. I don't go to parties and things like that. And a lot of people said, well, we thought you were just hateful, or we thought you didn't like us, or because I wouldn't attend the gathering. So I had to be the one to step forward and say, hey, don't think that I have anything against you guys because I don't come to the events. I've never actually been to events like that because it's just not my
It's not your cup of tea. Thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure there are many people on this in this class that feel the same way. As a fellow introvert, or at least ambivert, I totally feel you on that one. And I commend you for your courage in that, because it takes a lot of courage to stand up and challenge somebody's assumptions about yourself. and I really commend you for taking that extra step and having those very direct conversations. And I think that it sounds like you, and I imagine all those other people, really learned from that, from each of those times.
It being such a small company, I could see, especially after the Christmas party, how people started treating me different. No one spoke to me in the mornings when they come in. Hello, everybody, and they would skip over me, So I asked another colleague, what's going on? Did I do something? Like, well, they were talking at the Christmas party about how you're so standoffish and hateful. It's like, hateful how? Like, what did I
Like, what did I do? Yeah. Yeah.
I had to make it a point to go explain to everybody. I even gave a couple people a hug just to let them know, I'm really not this big demon you think I am. I just want to parties.
I know. Yeah, it's just, it just goes to show, like, we are all human, and we all do this. Like, that's why I said this is not, this ladder and kind of getting off the ladder. It's not about judgment. It's about awareness and intentionality, and to, understand, like, I mean, this is even good language to have a conversation with somebody. You know what? Like, I think you're on the ladder. Like, you might have to explain what it is, but, or some version of that that's like, you can understand, when you're kind of going up and down and you're making these inferences and you're making these leaps that are probably untrue, or that at the very least need to be questioned, and the other person needs a chance to respond, or you're on the receiving end of it. Like in Kendria's example, just like, I know somebody's thinking something about me, but it feels like this, but I'm not sure. And I don't, and so I'm just constantly have my guard up. It's, it's like understanding, like, what, somebody else is on the ladder. I'm on the ladder, but guess what? They're on the ladder too. We're kind of in this merry-go-round. And, so, and then I'm getting all standoffish, and, and then it's, we kind of, and then we start playing off, cause guess what? Like, people could, you can feel other people's energy, or whatever words you want to, insert there. It's like, when you're talking to another human, you can feel it. So it's like, you're picking up something, you're picking up these nonverbal cues. There's always something going on. And, so chances are you're both on the ladder. So again, the only way a lot of times is just to take a step back and actually have a conversation, have a courageous conversation, and really kind of name and confront whatever's going on. So really, really important, especially when it comes to conflict and, challenging assumptions. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? Kendria, did you want to add anything else to what you shared?
I was just thinking mainly about just like, choosing how, because you mentioned sometimes it's best to just have, just communication, how, it's key. But in a situation, when it comes to discrimination, I kind of question sometimes. Sometimes you just don't want to be that person who's like calling it out and pulling the card, quote unquote.
Right.
And so it just, I'm a little sensitive to being that person, but I know it could be helpful, because someone might say, I had no idea that you thought that way. I'm so sorry if it came across, and it could be that way, that it's just a mistake, or just me reading into it and going there all the time because I assume. But just the idea of communicating that, sometimes I'm just like, oh, this could make it worse. I don't know. Often I want to go around being like, wait a minute, what is this about? So,
and
you have to be selective.
Yeah, for sure. That makes total sense. And it sounds like, one of those times, like, just being really sensitive to your needs, like, what do you need out of the situation? And I don't know, maybe there's a way to sort of, especially because you've only been here a year and a half, and it truly is a culture shock. I lived in New Jersey for a summer, and I lived in London for a semester, and within about maybe 2 years of each other. And I had worse culture shock moving to New Jersey from the South than I did when I moved to England. I thought I was on another planet. I did not understand anyone. I was I can't, it was very challenging for me. It was just, why is everyone yelling at me? I didn't understand. I was like,
I was born in New Jersey, so that's not good. That's
I was like, I just wanted to order a sandwich. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it just, it was just this, everybody had a tone, everybody had a tone. And so I can only imagine what it must feel like to be from the North and move to the South. And it probably feels like you're on another planet, because you kind of are. Just like, how it was really different for me up North. So I think that, like you said, be selective, and I would just encourage you to just maybe just put a little toe in it, just like little by little. If there's a place where you could, that feels safe enough for you to, start to have that conversation, or maybe you have one, but you don't have one very often, or, just trying to tease it out, just to see what the reaction is. Like I said, if you feel it's safe to do so, just to see if you can kind of make some progress in there, in that area. And maybe you'll learn something that will help you, either kind of choose which data you're selecting, the way that you're adding meaning to that data in those different situations, especially because in some ways, I most definitely acknowledge the discrimination presence, because you just never know, and it's real. It's totally real. But at the same time, it's also it's like a cultural thing. It's like, it's just total, like, it's just very different. Because it's about kind of our nature, like this whole Southern hospitality thing, it means like everything's slow, but it also means that we are not direct. It means that we talk mess behind your back. We're not going to talk it to your face. So it's really like, and that's hard, especially when you're up north. That's opposite. So
yes, very much.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to get used to. And I'll share one personal example that I watched. This didn't happen to me, but I watched it happen to somebody that I worked very closely with. And this person, this was so fascinating. This person, she was white, and she had a PhD, and she's bright, motivated, was just trying to do her work. And she lived in Tennessee, and she had lived in Tennessee since she was 10 years old. 10 years old. But her family was from New Jersey. And she was originally from New Jersey, but she had been in the community. I mean, going back to elementary school, had been in the community in which she was working, but she still had an accent like she was from New Jersey. And she was treated, and I watched it happen. She was treated like an outsider almost everywhere she went, simply because of her tone and the way, and her accent and the way that she talked. And because she was working with people who were kind of, who were just more Southern or from the South or something. And there was this total, the ladder issue up and down the ladder from all these different people that she corresponded with and worked, from. And it was, we finally had to sit down and have a conversation. And it was very much in the middle of this collaboration issue. That's what we were doing. And we had to have a conversation about the fact that she sounded like she was from New Jersey. People made assumptions about her, and that she, all of these different things. And, some people had to, there was apologies that happened. There was, but it was just fascinating. And that didn't even that had nothing to do with race. That had to do with somebody's accent. and also, but it wasn't just accent. It was like the way that she communicated. She was direct. She was very direct, even though she'd lived in the South pretty much her whole life. She just had a very direct way of communicating that people that turned people off, that just weren't used to it. And I was dumbfounded by the whole thing, but I watched it all sort of on this, almost like a movie. And I had to eventually kind of intervene and sit people down, and we all had to sit and have a conversation about this. And so I feel you. I feel like it's
so in that situation, she needed to change. What changed? What needed to change? Just
people. It was weird. It was one of those things that she truly, objectively speaking, regardless of her accent, she was abrasive. And she didn't realize that she was being abrasive. She had a little bit of a chip on her shoulder for a number of reasons. And she wasn't really going about addressing those things in the best way. And then there was the other side of it where it was get over yourself. You know what I mean? This person is contributing, this person is doing lots of really good work. Let's take it down a notch and give her a chance, essentially. Quit being prejudiced against this person because of the way they talk. But we had to get there, because it was she was just basically everywhere she went, she just pissed people off, essentially. And she didn't realize what was happening. And so we had to really sit down and acknowledge it. And then things really did get better. Things did kind of move on. But it was one of those things like you had to kind of name it. And also she had to let go of a whole lot of frustration on her end, because she's like, I've lived here since I was 10, you know, like these are my people, like I'm a part of this community. Why are you like holding all this against me? So
I have a comment for Kendra too. I'm from Tennessee. I've lived here my whole life, but I spent about 8 years doing home health all over Tennessee. And there are still areas where people just aren't used to or have no experience with any kind of minority culture or individual for that matter, besides what they see on cable TV, which, as you know, is not always the best representation.
No, exactly.
They'll hold a bias or an assumption against you until you make a point to get to know them. They might look at you with these preconceived notions, but if you just make a conversation, just start a conversation and show them who you really are, and that you're not the guy that was on Rescue 911 last week or whatever, then their whole attitude will change. I have a lot of people who tell me I'm nowhere near what they expected. I've worked in a lot of communities that are all white, and I'm one of the first few Black people that they've had in their homes of all places, and they're really cautious about me until I sit them down and have a conversation about who I am, and that no one can represent me that they saw on TV, that I am who I am, and you need to get to know me before you assume what I'm like. Sometimes you just have to tell people flat out, this is who I am. I'm not who you think I am, but this is who I am. And they'll love you or they'll hate you, but at least you'll know it for real reasons and not for some assumption.
Thank you for saying that. That's a legit concern I've had as far as like going into social work and, wanting to help all people, knowing that not all people may accept me. So that was even brought up at when I had one of my interviews for my field for next year. And that was brought up by one of the interviewers, I was just surprised. I didn't bring it up. They brought it up. Like, how do you feel being in an environment that's where you're, a minority? I was just like, what? Oh, so I didn't know how I felt about it because I didn't think about it. I didn't come in prepared to talk about that. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up because it is something I am a little worried about.
Just know that when people have assumptions about you, if you ignore them or kind of treat them the way they treat you, you're kind of feeding into their assumptions.
Right.
So if they give you negative attitude, just approach them and show them who you really are. And you can either, one, change their attitude about you in particular, or you can verify that what you were believing was true and just to stay away from them altogether in the first place.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Make that step, girl. You can do it.
Real talk.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you for that. That's really, really, it's really, really wise. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we have gone way into our office hours, but I think that's a very appropriate use of our time. Are there any other questions or comments about any of these things we've been talking about, or any other comments before we jump off?
I do. This is something that Charisse was saying. I liked her perspective on it, but we constantly move. So I'm constantly in different cultures, and I feel like I get, my clients tell me all the time, "Oh, you're not from here because you can't understand anything that we say." So I don't how do you deal with that? I guess, how can you show a client that you can help them if you don't understand their culture? Because my supervisor, she laughs at me all the time. She'll say a city, and I guess its name has significance. I have no idea what it means. Does anybody else have that to where their clients feel like they might not be able to relate to them? Because there's a lot that I just don't know, and it's just because I haven't lived here. And the South is I feel like I'm on a different planet. I really do. I'm from California. This is totally different for me. And then 3 years from now, I'll be somewhere else with a new culture, and I'll learn it again.
That goes back to that cultural humility thing. You have to admit that the client is the expert of his life. Admit that you're not from here and you're not familiar with local cultures, and ask them. Just ask. Mm-hmm. It kind of levels the playing field and makes them feel like you're less of an authority and more of a companion or an equal. You know,
Mhm.
don't be scared to ask. You don't have to be the know-all with your clients. You don't know everything, and you're here to help them, and they're here to help you.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. And I think there's a huge piece that think about the power differential that exists between someone who's quote unquote here to help and then someone who is the helpee, as opposed to the helper. There's a real power difference there. There's a power imbalance. And think about the power and kind of empowerment that you can as a therapist or as a counselor when you're working with that client and you're putting the client in the position of being able to teach you something. That just flips it all on its head. And it really, I think it can be a really good way to build rapport. Just like Sharice is saying, like that cultural humility thing is real. I don't know what it's like to, be you, when you go to school every day, or to be you, living in this community facing, this type of adversity. Tell me what this is like for you. I can imagine it, but I don't know what it's like. So in your words, you're really kind of opening the door, you're opening the dialogue, you're being curious. You're not in that telling stance. You're not coming from that, I'm the expert, in this situation stance. And I think it's that it could be a really good way to build rapport and open up those doors. And I definitely support the whole idea of just asking the question. I was feeling really, like on the wrong foot, or however you want to say it, when I was in a consulting situation where I was in Oklahoma, and they did that thing that somebody mentioned a second ago, where and there was like 60 people in a room. It was not a one-on-one situation. And so I got really embarrassed because I didn't know what they were talking about, but they named a city or a county, I think. And everybody just started snickering over a county. I was mortified. I was mortified that this entire county was just being painted with this brush. And so I just kind of took a time out and I said, I think I'm really missing something. Can y'all help me understand what this is? What this is, what you're talking about. And so they explained this whole thing. And I learned very quickly why everybody was laughing, but it was, one of those things that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't have asked. So, can really help you, bridge those gaps and figure out, how better to work with your clients. So definitely agree with that. Anybody else have another response to Courtney? Yes, Christine, I agree with you too. Well, any other thoughts, comments, questions before we go? I wish I got to see you all more often, and I'm sorry that my my video is not working for whatever reason. So our next, looks like our next Zoom will actually not be until April 23rd now, when we will go through and see the end result of everybody's hard work over many, many weeks. And so just be on the lookout for more announcements and emails from me about that. But just please remember to try to keep your presentations to around 15 minutes, and we can kind of talk more one-on-one with our when we meet in our individual SWOT groups. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.